We have all heard of our inner child. We've heard that we need to heal our inner child. We've heard lots of ideas about how to heal our inner child. But healing our inner child can be pretty challenging. It can be difficult to know what that really even means, and certainly what it looks like. And I have a little bit of a confession. I actually am not sure that I like my inner child. So then what? Welcome, I'm Peggy Oliveira. Thank you for joining me. So I will acknowledge that there was a long period of time that I did not like the child within me, particularly the early teenage years me, because I thought of myself in some really negative ways. Lots of negative ways. And I carried so much shame around those things because I believed that that is who I was. That is how I was born, and it is who I was meant to be. And that shame that was built over time and that was really reinforced during those years, it stayed with me until I did a whole lot of healing. I did some healing and the shame was still there. It really required going through a lot of healing before I was able to get to a place in which the shame around that time in my life was no longer there. And part of the reason I'm sharing that with you is because I know that sometimes it can feel, well, probably oftentimes, it can feel impossible. If you recognize that you feel a lot of shame around something, to really imagine and certainly believe that you can actually get to a point in your life in which you no longer feel shame around that. And I think for so many people who are on this journey, there's obviously a lot of pieces to healing, but being able to shed that shame is one of the most important and profound aspects, because if there's any shame there, it affects everything and it keeps you from being able to heal, no matter how much you're working on grief and loss, no matter how much you're working on your self-worth, no matter how much practicing you're doing. If you feel that shame, it is going to ultimately make it impossible to fully heal. Now, I want to be clear, that doesn't mean that you can't do a lot of healing along that journey, even if you do still have shame. In fact, you will, if you stick with it, you will do a lot of healing before that shame is fully gone, because they kind of go together. We have to work on the shame in order to heal, but we have to experience some healing in order to be able to let go of some of that shame. So this video isn't ultimately really about shame, but it is important to recognize that so much of the healing for that inner child is being able to allow that child to recognize that the shame that they've been carrying is not theirs, that it never was. Allowing the opportunity to shed that, because part of the reason that even if we feel shame about things in our later years, part of the reason that that shame takes the hold that it does and is so intense at times is because it's building on the shame that we started developing very early in our lives. So, inner child healing can mean a lot of different things to different people. And relatively recently, after doing these videos for, 12, 13 years at this point, it is kind of relative. So relatively recently, probably in the last year, maybe even 6 months or so, I did a video in which I remember talking about inner child healing and inner child stuff. And I don't remember exactly what that was, but I do remember that in doing that video, I thought, oh, maybe a workbook about healing the inner child would be helpful. So, like a lot of things I have ideas about, I kind of was really into it at first, and then it kind of got put up on a shelf, and I kind of forgot about it. Can you relate? I do that quite often. And it's not because I lose interest in it. It's because, in part, like my focus changes. Or if I get brought out of it for some reason, I find difficulty getting back to it. So anyway, I have virtually kind of completed the workbook. I haven't uploaded it or finalized it, or it's not quite ready yet. But as I was thinking about it recently, I thought there might be a couple pieces in it that I'd like to share with you to just kind of explore a little bit of some things that are important to recognize when it comes to the kind of acknowledgement of the inner child, and certainly healing the inner child outside of shame, because what I'm about to share with you is not specifically related to shame. And the reality is, whether we are intentional about healing the inner child or not, the very nature of healing is, in a sense, healing that inner child. But there are times that it can be important, and sometimes maybe even necessary, to, in this work, on this journey, to be able to go back to certain ideas and beliefs that were developed, or certain experiences, certain wounds, and kind of be able to explore what that is and the impact that it's had and the meaning that was attached to it. Because the part of us at whatever age it was that we experienced different types of things or developed certain beliefs, that part of us, whether at 2 years old or 7 years old or 10 years old or even 15 years old, that part of us is the part that becomes reactive, that experiences that intensity of feeling and reaction that we often have, because that part has been holding on to whatever those thoughts or feelings, fears, and shame are. And it's holding on to it from a place of, I'm not quite sure really what word to use, but it's kind of hidden. And so there's no real opportunity to unpack and explore. And so that part of us holds on to it with no kind of outlet or ability to express, and certainly no ability to heal. So some of the things that might be present that would point to some inner child healing that could be helpful. Now, these are things that you've probably identified before. If they're there, you've likely identified them before. So this probably isn't going to be groundbreaking, but it is something, again, just to kind of serve as a little bit of a reminder or even just kind of a container for inner child and the idea of what that means. So I'm looking over here because I have it up on my tablet over here. So some things that you might recognize as beliefs, or things that you repeat to yourself over and over again, stories that you have told yourself about who you are or things around you. So just as you listen, like, recognize, are these things that you can relate to? And then after I'm done reading them, we'll talk about it a little bit more. So one thing you might recognize is feeling like you're not enough, no matter what you accomplish. And when I say accomplish, that could mean anything. But I know for so many people, probably everybody that I know, there are absolutely things in their life that they could point to and feel a sense of accomplishment about, and feel good about that, maybe even feel proud of it. Yet, no matter what they might accomplish, no matter what they might do, they revert back to still not enough. Maybe having a hard time trusting people or getting close to others. Now, if you're watching this video, I'm guessing you can probably relate to that, at least to some degree. Maybe sometimes more than others, but it's likely there. Feeling responsible for everyone else's feelings. Really, I think probably most people watching this can relate to some of these, even if maybe not right at this moment, at some point, and maybe even some point in the not so distant future. Struggling with anxiety, depression, or feeling overwhelmed, and maybe even feeling overwhelmed relatively easily. Having a critical inner voice that never seems to quiet down. Feeling like you're always waiting for the other shoe to drop. And this can come up a lot where you can just kind of be on edge a lot and just waiting for the bad thing to happen. You might also notice that if something good does happen, so maybe you do something that you can feel good about, or maybe just kind of randomly something good happens to you. Somebody shows, a stranger shows you kindness or something like that. Something unexpected in a good way kind of comes to you. For so many people, by far the majority of people that I have worked with, and this is true for me as well, when something good happens, that anticipation of something bad happening is kind of always right there. And it can feel even more intense, more scary, more certain when that good thing happens. And there are different reasons for that I'm not going to get into right now. People pleasing to avoid conflict or rejection. And lastly, feeling guilty when you try to take care of yourself. So I say lastly because that's the list that I have here, but it's certainly not the end of the hundreds of different things that you might experience. So with the things that I mentioned, were you kind of nodding along? Or were you thinking, you know what, I don't really think that this pertains to me? So just notice, I don't know how many I actually just said there, but how many did you find that you relate to? I'd actually love for you to share in the comments. And if you notice relating to any of these, did you notice anything coming up for you? Maybe it was just the acknowledgement and that was it. Or maybe you found that in that acknowledgement, your mind took you somewhere. Maybe there was a response in your body in some way. Just take a moment and notice what that might be. All of these things are certainly related to, there's a lot of different reasons actually why somebody could struggle with these things, but certainly all of these things are relevant for people that have experienced childhood trauma. And so it might seem like, well, what does that mean then about an inner child? Why are we talking about it in that context? And I think for a lot of people, and I was definitely like this, and I think I still am to a large degree. But when you've experienced childhood trauma or a lot of chaos in your early life, it's very easy to feel completely disconnected from the fact that you were ever a child. Like, you can even look at a picture of yourself and feel no connection to that child. Like, it can be really difficult to recognize that that is you. And that, being able to reconnect with that, is part of the healing, because so much of the wounding, so much of the unworthiness began there. So that child within you carries the wound and the fears and the beliefs and the shame that lead to the ongoing thoughts and beliefs and experiences that I just mentioned, and of course, many others. So, some other things, and kind of where these stories can come from, are things that we tend to repeat to ourselves over and over again. And it can be in a lot of different types of circumstances. It can be fears that we have. For example, I'm too much. That can be a belief that we have, and it can also be a fear that we hold going into a lot of different types of circumstances. Like if we are meeting somebody new, whether it's a friend, potentially even a coworker, or somebody that could potentially be a romantic partner. If we hold that fear that we're too much, it's going to impact how we show up in our current lives and in those circumstances. So it can be a belief that shows up as a fear to keep us from engaging at all, or engaging in a really fully authentic way, because we're afraid that who we are is going to be too much. And kind of ironically, in a sense, at the same time, not enough. And that, I know, may not make a lot of sense, but I'm guessing that a lot of you can probably relate to that. The idea of being bad. And that can sound in our mind a lot of ways. The things that we look to prove that we're bad can look a lot of different ways. It can be a huge spectrum. None of it necessarily actual evidence that we're bad. But in our mind, we believe that these are the realities that prove that we're bad. Another one might be, I'm not lovable. And there are so many reasons why we end up believing that. And when you think about a child, again, no matter what age that child is, even thinking of a teenager who is trying to really discover who they are independent of everybody around them and their parents and their siblings. If they're going into that phase of development from a place of being unlovable, believing that they are unlovable, the impact that has on their individuation, the impact that it has on what they believe is possible for their lives and how they put themselves out into the world, it's profound. The idea that you can't trust anyone. And this one can be quite challenging because oftentimes people don't necessarily recognize that they don't trust. They may notice having some feelings around something, or they may notice that they don't want to get too close, or they may notice some different types of behavioral sorts of things, but they wouldn't necessarily notice having a thought in their mind that says, I can't trust you, or I don't trust people. They might, but in moments or in interactions, oftentimes that thought isn't necessarily going to be conscious. You might have some other thoughts that are somewhat related to that in some way, or some thoughts that tell you that this isn't safe, or you need to pull back, or they don't want to hear about it because you're too much. So you might have some other thoughts related to that, but not being able to trust is huge. And for anybody who's experienced childhood trauma, trust is an issue, even if consciously you don't recognize that you have specific trust issues. And again, when we're thinking about the inner child and inner child healing, that sense of mistrust, not only with others or being able to trust in others, but the profound sense of not being able to trust ourselves is real. And again, it starts early on. And so part of the healing that we have to do, and I know in my work with people, there's a lot of reflecting back and exploring and understanding different situations in which they could have trusted themselves, that there was a part of them that sensed, that knew, that felt, that wanted, but they ignored that for potentially a variety of reasons. And that doesn't mean that you can't trust yourself. It means actually the opposite, that there is a part of you, the intuitive knowing part of you, that knew, that can trust. The part of you that made you believe that you couldn't trust is the part that was coping, that was surviving, that needed to do what needed to be done in order to get through it. And I've said this before, but learning to trust yourself, trusting in the ability that you can trust yourself, that is something that is ongoing through this journey. And it happens kind of incrementally over time with practice and experiences. Another one might be, I have to be perfect to be worthy of love. And again, that perfect could potentially look different ways. Another one, my feelings don't matter. I don't matter. Now, these are core beliefs. And how the thoughts, the actual things that we're saying to ourselves that reinforce those core beliefs may sound a little different than I don't matter. It's not a big deal. I shouldn't feel this way. Minimizing. Those are ways that we might speak to ourselves to reinforce that belief. I'm responsible for everyone else's happiness. This is another one where you may not necessarily consciously have that thought, where you're sitting there thinking, I'm responsible for this person's happiness. But in the choices that you make, in the anxiety that you carry around, in the decisions to show up or not, in denying parts of yourself, that can all come from that idea that who I am and how I show up will determine whether this person is happy or unhappy. And it's not that you think you necessarily truly have that power and you have that much influence to determine whether somebody is happy or not happy, but you feel responsible for whether somebody is happy or not. You feel responsible for other people's feelings. And if I'm good enough, maybe they'll love me. Maybe they'll protect me. And unfortunately, if you experienced ongoing trauma, the idea that you're not good enough, if that is a belief that you held, if that is a fear that you held, if you were abused over and over again, then in your mind, it was reinforced over and over again that you're not loved, or at least not loved enough. And that is a huge wound. And again, thinking about it from a child's perspective, who is taking in all these experiences, who is having all of these types of thoughts and fears. This is why being able to really think about and acknowledge the reality that within us is every part of ourselves. Even if we feel completely disconnected from that child, no matter what age, that child is living within us. When we notice that we react strongly to something, particularly if it's not in such a positive way, whether we feel it internally or we express it externally, very often that is that child is feeling the impact of that wound being opened again. So the intensity of that feeling, no matter what that looks like, but the pain that is associated with that, it's impacting that child. And of course, we're feeling it. So when we are healing, generally, we are doing the work of dismantling all of these beliefs and stories. And it is part of the reason why, like, bringing up the past isn't an excuse. It's not a deflection. It's not playing the victim. It's none of that. We have to be able to look at and acknowledge the reality of the wounding that is still there. Because if that child never got an opportunity to be witnessed, to be heard, to be able to express what was there, what remains, it can't heal. So inner child work can be some specific exercises, and it can be helpful to be really intentional about thinking specifically about your experience as a child during different types of situations or ages. There is a time and a place for that quite often. And I think it's also important to recognize that when you are actively working on healing, when you are acknowledging and validating and understanding and practicing self-compassion, all of those things do help heal that inner child. And both the adult that is watching this video, and I said both, but all, and all the parts of you, all the ages in which there was wounding, all of you deserve to be witnessed, to be heard, to be acknowledged, to be validated, and to heal. So I would love to hear from you. What did you notice coming up? Please share in the comments. What do you think of the idea of inner child? I really struggled with it for a very long time. And sometimes still do. Like I'll look at a picture of myself when I was young and I feel a lot better than I used to for sure, but I still feel often pretty disconnected from that kid. And again, whether I was 3 years old or a teenager. So share what came up for you. I'd love to hear from you. This workbook will hopefully be coming out soon, and I will share with you when it does. So thank you all for being here, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.